Good evening, everyone, and welcome to North Penn's Parent Keystone Information Night. You've been hearing about Keystones for the last year or so, and there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of rumors, there's a lot of supposition out there. So we thought we'd pull together an evening to try to get some facts and some information and try to help educate parents a little bit more about the Keystones. We're going to have 4 folks presenting this evening. I'm Bert Hines, principal of North Penn High School. I'll be one of the presenters. I have Dr. Tony Butts, who is our manager of curriculum for the North Penn School District. Ms. Karen Holmes, who is the English supervisor for the North Penn School District. And Mr. Eric Weathers, who is a biology teacher here at the high school. And also, I'll point out the fact that our assistant superintendent, Dr. Diane Holben, is here, and she'll be able to jump in and answer questions if needed as well. And Dr. Deb McKay, our director of secondary ed here at North Penn High School. So I'm going to begin with Dr. Butts and ask her to tell us a little bit about what are the Keystones. Dr. Butts.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's really cold out there, and I know that all of us lead very busy lives, so the fact that you're here tonight really means a lot to us. Hopefully we'll be able to provide for you information to support your students' success with the Keystones. For tonight, we're really going to focus on the following. We're going to focus on what Keystone Exams are. We're also going to share with you how Keystone Exams are kind of different than what you may have been used to when you were going through school. And we're also going to share with you the plans that we have put into place through programming, through curriculum, to support students with Keystone success. And then lastly, we're going to share with you an alternative pathway to Keystone success in the event that a student is not proficient with Keystones. So that's our agenda for tonight, and hopefully tonight we will be able to really answer a lot of the questions that you might have regarding Keystones, the impact of Keystones, and where your child fits with this new state assessment. So what are these Keystone Exams? Well, the Keystone Exams came into being through legislation. In 2010, the Pennsylvania State Legislature voted to enact Keystone Exams. And these Keystone Exams are end-of-course exams, and we'll explain to you a little bit what that really means. But know that these end-of-course assessments are tightly linked to the courses that a student will be enrolled in, and tightly aligned to the materials, the content, the instruction of that course. The other thing that I need you to know about Keystone Exams is that Keystone Exams, all students are required to take Keystone Exams. So students in grades 7 through 10th grade for Algebra 1 will be taking Keystone Exams. Grade 10 for biology and English Lit, they'll be taking exams during that year. In addition to that, I just wanted to share with you that you will be receiving more information about these courses in upcoming program of study meetings that building principals will be providing for your students in whatever school your child is enrolled in. So please, pay attention to some of those program of studies discussions, because you'll be hearing more about these courses there and when students are enrolled in them, and what additional information you may need to know about these courses. Those are the 3 mandatory Keystone Exams that are given now. What we also wanted to prepare you for is some upcoming Keystone Exams that are being discussed at the state level to be implemented in the future. At this point in time, they are not being given, but we wanted to share this with you in case these exams are implemented by the state. And these 2 exams are the Keystone Composition Exam. Our plans are to place that particular exam in grade 9 English, as well as the civics exam. And plans are currently in place to have that particular exam in grade 10. So those are the Keystone Exams. And again, all of our students are required to take these exams. For the class of 2017 and beyond, And the class of 2017 is our current 9th grade class. Please know that they are required to take the Keystone exam and be proficient in the Keystone exam in order to graduate. So, because of that, we really wanted to make sure that you understood what is entailed with these exams and really kind of some of the content involved with these exams. So we're going to have Miss Karen Holmes explain to us, what is this difference between these Keystone exams and what you may have been used to when you were growing up.
Good evening, and thank you for coming here. I echo Tony's words that it is a cold night, but it's warm in here, so we're glad that you are here. The first thing we have up there is the end-of-course assessments, and this is different than you may have known with the PSSA testing, and many of your students have taken PSSA tests. At the secondary level, the PSSA tests are really very general in terms of reading, writing, and math. The new Keystone tests are really geared to the course standards, the PA course standards that we have in English, and that we have in Algebra 1, and that we have in biology. So first of all, the student needs to take that course in order to understand what the standards are, and then they would go on from there. So that's the first big difference. That they're end-of-course exams, not just a general exam that the student has to take. The second one, and that's the one that we're going to be focusing on as we go through our presentation, is that the expectations on these exams, they're higher expectations than we've had on other previous state exams. Now, what do we mean by higher expectations? Well, does it mean that it's more difficult? Somewhat. It also means that the types of questions that the students will be asked on these tests is different, and we're working with the students to train them to learn how to answer the questions, to analyze the question, to see what that answer entails. Now, we have something called Webb's depth of knowledge, and the Webb's depth of knowledge at level 2 and 3 is really where these keystones are aiming for. And we have our next little metaphor here. We like the image of the student being successful in climbing this staircase of critical thinking. So Webb's depth of knowledge really represents this whole idea that I am going to think at higher and higher levels as I, as a student, progress through a course. The student would start at the bottom of our staircase with level 1. The level 1 is the information. We're going to climb up this staircase of knowledge. We climb up the level of Webb's depth of knowledge as we're doing this. So we have 4 levels here of critical thinking. The first one is recall, and that is the one where you know your math facts, you know your grammar, you know this basic information in a course. You know that basic, I know how to write a paragraph. I particularly know how to solve an equation. Your basic math facts, all of this is in recall. Now, a student has to know this in order to get through the Keystone and get through the course. The questions on the Keystone exams really relate to levels 2 and 3. Level 2 of Webb's depth of knowledge becomes that application. How do I infer? How do I interpret? How do I apply the knowledge I learned in level 1? So those are the types of questions that the student is going to have to answer there. Many times these come with our multiple choice types of questions. Level 3 is strategic thinking. Now, strategic thinking means that they have to synthesize a variety of essays, pieces of literature, that they have to pull together facts and come up with an answer. So as we go up this staircase, you have the students looking at a difficult problem and being able to conceptualize it and build from there. And quite often on all 3 of the Keystone exams, level 3 is asked through an open-ended question, an essay, a problem that's a multi-step problem. So that's the difference between the PSSA and the Keystone types of tests. And now we're going to show you some examples of these different levels. Mr. Hines is going to do math.
Thank you, Karen. You've been hearing a lot of words: synthesize, critical thinking, strategic thinking, core standards. And a lot of folks are saying, what does all this mean and what does it look like? Show me some examples. So that's one of the unique things that we're going to do for you this evening. We're going to show you some of these depths of knowledge questions in each of the 3 subject areas, starting with math, so you can get some handle on what is it that your sons and daughters are going to be asked to do. Karen just told us depths of knowledge is going to be tested at the 2nd and 3rd levels here. There'll be some 1st level questions on the Keystones, but if you only can perform at the 1st level, you're not going to get yourself to proficiency. So students are going to have to make that stretch, and they're going to have to be able to answer problems and answer questions at the level 2 depth of knowledge. What we have up here in front of you, if you think back to when you were in school, you were probably proud of yourself when you could look at this and say, you know what, that's a linear function, it's a graph of a line, and when the teacher asked you, and if this could be a final exam question, which of these equations describes the graph, you would have sat there and said, well, let's see. The teacher taught me about things like slope-intercept form, and I remember the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So knowing that, if I look at the graph crosses the y-axis at the point, the y-intercept, and you look at that and it crosses the y-axis at +3. Immediately you can eliminate 2 of the options for the answers because the equation does not end in a +3 on choice A or on choice C. You're halfway there. Now you've got to go back and do the slope. More recall. What is the definition of slope? When you think about slope being rise over run, or you think of the change in y over the change in x, you start looking at that, or some folks may just intuitively say, that's a pretty steep slope. And I know that because the slope is steep, the slope has to be greater than 1. So now I'm down to, is the slope 2 or is the slope a half? Intuitively, some folks are going to be able to quickly look at the picture and say, yes, I can look at this and see that D is the correct answer. Other students are going to have to take other routes, and that's okay. Some are going to plug in numbers, and some are going to try a few things, and some are going to work a little bit on the slope and in different ways. That's okay, because you have essentially unlimited time on the tests. We can extend the time as needed. This is level 1. Most of you in this room would have been quite proud of yourself to get that right on the final exam at the end of the year in Algebra 1. So what does level 2 look like? When Ms. Holmes was talking to us, level 1 was a one-step recall, understand the information, and quickly apply it. Level 2 became more complex. It involved a number of steps. When we throw up the next example, the first thing you notice, if you look, I know it's a little hard on the fine print there, but at the very top, they throw at you 2 inequalities. When the math teacher in Algebra 1 says the word inequality, equality was one thing. That's one level of difficulty. As soon as you take it to inequality, it steps up that level of anxiety, and it steps up the level of difficulty in terms of conceptual thinking. So you've got 2 inequalities up there, and you have 4 graphs here in order to choose from. As you look at the inequalities, a student needs to say, I know that if the statement says y is less than something, or y is greater than something, the graph is going to have a dotted line. If it says less than or equal to, then the line is going to be solid. So there's a piece of information they need to consider. And as you look at this, and I'm actually squinting to see it, it's a little hard to see from there, but graphs in choice A and in F have the dotted lines. The inequalities that are up on there are both inequalities that do not require an equal sign, so neither of those are going to be the solid lines. You can eliminate choices B and D. And now then you have to look and figure out which of the other two is correct. If you go back to your slope-intercept form, you start looking at the slope, you start looking at y-intercepts. If I look at the y-intercept of the inequality y is less than x minus 6, which one of the two remaining graphs has a y-intercept at minus 6? And you'll see that that is choice B. The other one doesn't qualify. Again, multiple steps, analytical types of thinking are involved. In the depth of knowledge level 2, the students are given the answers. In depth of knowledge level 1, the students are given the answers. Pick one. You could work from the answer and go back to the question and try to work it out that way. You may just know the information and be able to think it through. But let's take a look at what happens when you get to depth of knowledge at level 3 in math. Now you end up with a word problem. And a rather complex word problem. I'm going to get up here because that's a little tough to focus on. I want you to read this problem. And when you see this, don't run out the door. An apple farmer owner is deciding how to use each day's harvest. She can use the harvest to produce either apple juice or apple butter. The information she uses to make the decision is listed below. And here are the points. A bushel of apples will make 16 quarts of apple juice. A bushel of apples will make 20 pints of apple butter. The apple farm can produce no more than 180 pints of apple butter each day. The apple farm harvests no more than 15 bushels of apples each day. The information given can be modeled with a system of inequalities. When X is the number of quarts of apple juice and Y is the number of pints of apple butter, two of the inequalities that model the situation are X is greater than or equal to 0 and Y is greater than or equal to 0. So the student's first task is to write two more inequalities to complete the system of inequalities, modeling the information. That's step 1. And as you read on, there is a step 2 that asks them, after they have identified those inequalities, to turn around and graph those inequalities. And then after they've graphed the inequalities, it goes on even further and says, now that you've graphed it, explain how the apple farm makes a profit of 2 1/4 on each pint of apple butter and $2.50 on each quart of apple juice. Explain how you can be certain the maximum profit will be realized after the apple farm produces 96 quarts of apple juice and 180 pints of apple butter. Is your head spinning yet? That's the complexity. That's the multi-step problem. Write the inequalities. Use those inequalities that you've come up with in Part A to graph in Part B. Well, if you don't get the inequalities right in Part A, you're going to have a problem in Part B. By the time you get to Part C, a student needs to look at this and say, this is a linear programming problem. And in a linear programming problem, I need to know the profit equation. It's not asking you for the profit equation, but it's asking you for information on how to do the profit equation. Again, multi-step vocabulary is incredibly important here. Whether it's math vocabulary, whether it's English vocabulary, whether it's science vocabulary, the vocabulary becomes extremely important, because if you don't know the vocabulary and you go into the exam not knowing those words or some of that key information, you're not going to be able to use it, you're not going to be able to apply it. Here's a quick solution to the equation for those of you who are sitting there with scrap paper or working it out in your head or trying some of that, trying to solve it. So we've worked that out for you. The thing with the solution is it's important to look at the number of steps that are required in the solution. Identifying the first inequality is relatively easy because it goes right back to one of the original statements that the apple farm produces no more than 180 pints of apple butter. The translation in math language is that y has to be less than or equal to 180. And when you get down to the graph and graph it, that's creating your horizontal line. Ultimately, the student needs to know that the vertices of the quadrilateral that is formed by the intersection of all these graphs are the points that have to be inserted into the profit equation. Okay? I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm trying to give you an understanding of the understandings that young folks must have in Algebra 1 when they're taking this test. Algebra 1 is no longer enough to say, oh, it's about sign numbers. And if I know that I multiply a negative by a negative, I'm going to get a positive. It's not about just simplifying some fractions, maybe with a little exponent thrown in here or there. It's taking basic facts, basic knowledge of algebra, and then asking students to apply it and apply it to real-world situations. You've heard your sons and daughters talk about open-ended questions, and that's what this is. And every one of these keystones in algebra is going to have an open-ended question or several open-ended questions. That, when we start talking about rigor, when we start talking about these are tough tests, if you're sitting there thinking, I'm glad I didn't have to take that type of test in Algebra 1, you'll be in the majority. So just be aware that this is the level of expectation. And we'll talk in a little bit about how we're going to get our students to this so that all of them can do it. Okay, I'm going to pass it along so you get some idea of the biology exam. I said we'd do all three, so here's Mr. Eric Weathers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hines, very much, and thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. So I'm going to go through the three different levels that we talked about with the depth of knowledge with biology. So our first question here, it says, which statement best describes a scientific observation? If you automatically know the definition for scientific observation, you can quickly look through these answers and start to check off the ones that don't make much sense until you get to maybe two that you're in between, as this said, best describes. So you have to be very careful because sometimes they like to put two that are similar to each other, and then you have to pick the better one out of those two. This one still falls into that range of recall with the answer. There isn't much of a thought process between the definition and the correct answer. Usually they could ask you to do also a task like a measurement for a level 1 question as well. I like to think of the level 1 as you're following a recipe, and when it calls for eggs, if you don't have any eggs, well, now your recipe's done and you've ruined whatever you were making. So that's our level 1 depth of knowledge for our biology keystone. And the correct answer for this one is letter A. You might have been able to get through if you thought, okay, well, what does the term observation mean? And relate it to the idea of it's our senses, whether it be our sight or our smell or our touch. But if you didn't know scientific observation or you didn't know the definition of observation, you're not going to get to the correct answer for this one. In a level 2 question, we're now going to have this table here that we have to interpret. And again, this one I like to think about as a guided analysis. They're giving you the starting information up here, and they're giving you the ending information down here. And like Mr. Hines said, you can really start from the beginning up here and try to work your way to the end, or you can start at the end and try to go backwards and see if anything makes sense or works its way out. So I think of this one again as guided analysis, as they give you a little bit of structure or a little bit of support as you're trying to answer these questions. Now, you then have to think, okay, what's genotype and what's phenotype? How exactly does this relate to this problem? And then as I go through and I start looking at the question, there's other things that I need to pull out or other information that I need to synthesize as I read through, such as the idea of multiple alleles. Is this something as a Mendelian characteristic, or is this something then as a non-Mendelian characteristic? I can then continue to read through and realize that I am looking for a child that has type A blood, and the father had type AB blood. I'm looking for the type of blood that the mom would have as a phenotype, not as a genotype. So you're then focusing over on this portion. In order to get this answer, you have to go through and check off or go through 4 different types of Punnett squares to see if there's a possibility that mom's phenotype could be all of these or 2 of these. And you also have to think of the idea of, well, is O recessive, or is B, dominant, or is AB something as a codominant allele? So there's a lot of information that the students have to think through as they're trying to answer this question. And as they go through and they do the 4 different types of Punnett squares to double check, it ends up that letter D is going to be the correct answer for this one. And what really trips a lot of students up is when we are looking over here, the mom could be phenotype BO, and with that, it allows you to have the mix of a child with A blood. Our last type here, again, depth of knowledge level 3. This is the open-ended question that they like to give. Whether you call it open-ended or constructed response question, it means the same thing. But with this one, there's strategic thinking or planning that needs to happen. They then need to evaluate the information, and usually it asks them to predict something within the future. So I'll come a little closer to read this one to you. It says, a cattle farmer genetically crosses a cow, and in parentheses female, with a white coat, with a bull, which is the male, with a red coat. The resulting calf or offspring is going to be roan, which means there are red and white hairs intermixed in the coat of the calf. The genes for coat color in cattle are codominant. They give you a little bit of help there, letting you know that it's codominant. But if you don't know what the vocabulary is, and you don't understand what codominant is, then this question is going to become very, very difficult. And this question, just like the math one, you start out with part A, and we build from part A to part B to part C. So if you couldn't answer part A right, you're not going to be able to answer part B or part C. And what we found out is that not being able to answer these questions to the highest level that the state expects, this is what really ends up separating the students from the proficient range and the advanced proficient range. Now, I am not going to go into every detail of how to answer this question. You're more than welcome to come to my class for the next 2 months so that we can break this down for you so that you can understand it. But I will quickly put up what the answers look like in shorthand. And again, the students wouldn't have to use this exact notation. It's up to them, but they would have to go through and explain what the notation is. And again, you see these terms like genotype and phenotype, again, relating back to that vocabulary or basic level of information that they then have to apply out. And I think up next, we're going to hand it to Ms. Holmes here, and she's going to take us off in English.
So we've seen in both cases where vocabulary or academic vocabulary is essential for the students to know. So Webb's depth of knowledge for the English test is a little bit different. The English test is structured so that the student reads a passage and then answers a series of questions. So they have something to refer back to as they're answering the questions in most cases. Up here you see an example of a vocabulary. They have to know what the word synonym means. Most students coming into the secondary English program you've seen these little vocabulary books. And they will know what a synonym is supposed to be. So which word is a synonym for dilapidation? And the answer obviously is B, disrepair. This, you do not have to read a textual passage for this type of answer. On the Keystone test that we currently see, you will not necessarily find this type of vocabulary question. What you will see now is the question will be, what is a particular word in context, and how does that move the meaning of the story or the theme of the story along? And that's the difference between what we were asked in perhaps a PSSA type question to what is being asked in the Keystone type of question. So this is recall. I just have to know the meaning of the word and not do anything with it. That would be your level 1 Webb's depth of knowledge. Level 2, as we go through this, is going to refer back to a particular textual passage. Now this one happens to be from John Kennedy's speech in 1962. And I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read it to you, I think. And the passage is, those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. Now the question says, why is the propaganda technique used in the sentence effective? So we've got a couple of things going on here. First of all, many of the questions, half of the English Keystone test is based on informational type of texts, not necessarily a short story or a poem or a novel. Much of what the students are being asked to read is factually based, could be a speech, could be an essay. This happens to be a fairly well-known speech. So you'll see many of our teachers incorporating this type of information in their courses. The particular sentence here that you see has a couple of words that the students may or may not know. The word to founder. Now, the word founder, okay, is to really kind of, I'm not knowing what I'm doing, where am I going? They might know what a founder is, but this is a verb use of the words. So they have to think about that. You also have backwash, which really carries with it both a nautical and aeronautical type of metaphor. So within this passage, you have a complex text that the students are being asked to interpret or infer. The question, okay, doesn't ask them, well, what does this passage mean? The question asks what propaganda technique is used here. So they have to pull upon their knowledge of propaganda techniques in order to answer the question. Okay, and so there's a little bit difference, and it carries, as you go up the ladder of Webb's depth of knowledge, the knowledge of being able to read the passage and analyze the passage and then know what these techniques are and be able to single out what's happening. And I want to give the answer. Okay, the answer then would be B. It convinces the reader to support this country's continued efforts in being a forerunner in all scientific endeavors. And they would have to know the vocabulary word endeavors in order to understand that. So it's a very complex little question. The questions on the Keystone, you would have a particular text. They would read perhaps 2 or 3 pages of the speech, and then they would have maybe 5 to 6 to 8 questions that would be multiple choice. The next level up, level 3, is the open-ended type of question on the English Keystone, is usually a writing sample that the students would have to do. And this asks them what is Howard's thoughts, analyze what Howard's thoughts throughout the passage reveal about his personality. Use information from the text to do so. The this question refers to about a 3-page little story, type of memoir, where a young man is going back to his hometown and looking at what he grew up with. And it really takes this person's viewpoint as he's coming back into a situation. So the student has to have read this, looked at Howard and who Howard is. It asks for a kind of recognition of what type of paragraph am I going to write here. So the student says, all right, I'm going to have to write a characterization paragraph. And so what do I need to have as my opening sentence? And then the key here is to pick out evidence from the text. And you will hear people talking about text-based evidence or text-based quotations, where your students will have to go back into the short story, into the speech, into the essay, and pull out information, and then put that into the paper that they're writing. Their writing compositions will reflect these test-based answers. So that's what's required on the Keystone, and you'll find that many, many of the things that your students will be writing in English class and in social studies will reflect this type of writing. And we're going to take a look at the 3 different exams at this point, what's being done.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. We'll start with the algebra piece. The obvious question is, what are we doing to get students ready for the test? How are we sure that what we're doing is getting them ready? And if it doesn't get them ready, what are we going to do to ensure that when they have to take the test a second time, that they are in fact able to do so? The first part is aligning our curriculum to the state standards. And we've been working on that for years, and we have that in really good shape from my perspective anyway. So our curriculum is aligned. Not a problem. We're teaching the right information. It's aligned to the state standards. It's going to be the material that students will be tested on. New materials and resources. Are the textbooks that we're using appropriate? Do they have examples written at the Webb's Depth of Knowledge Level 2 and Level 3? Think back to the textbooks that you had when you were in high school. They gave you an example in a math text that was usually pretty easy, and then they gave you another one that was a little bit harder, and then they gave you some homework problems, and usually the homework problems were often a whole lot harder than any of the examples. So one of the things we have to do is start looking at textbooks that will address the depth of knowledge that students are going to be expected to perform at. So that's one thing that we're working on. Intervention. We have students who are going to take Algebra 1 and they're going to take the Keystone and they're going to come out advanced first time around. Others are going to be proficient. And once you're proficient, you don't have to take the test again. But we still have others who are going to be at the basic level and some who are at the below basic level. For those students, we need to have intervention programs, we need to have remediation programs. And I'm here to tell you that those programs are in place. If you start in the school day of a high school student and you happen to need intervention, the first thing that may happen is you might not be in a 6-period per cycle math course, you might be in an 8-period per cycle math course. Because the 8-period per cycle math course is going to cover the same topics that the other one is going to cover at 6 periods a cycle, but it's going to have some additional work, some build up those basic skills, some support, some remediation type things built into it. Every day, every lunch period, I have a math teacher available upstairs in a classroom right above the cafeteria for math support. No high school student needs 45 minutes for lunch. It's a nice break in the day, but most teenagers can finish lunch in 15 to 20 minutes. And that gives them another 20 minutes or 25 minutes where they could go and get some extra help within the school day. Math teacher available. It might be one-on-one, it might be several with the one teacher, but that is an option for students. A few years ago, we adjusted our bell schedule here in the high school to have a 9-period day, 2 days a week, every Wednesday and Thursday. Students can get help from their teachers or from another math teacher within the school day during 9th period on Wednesdays and Thursdays. For those who are willing or able to stay after school, we have X period on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to provide additional supports for students so that you don't have to worry about a tutor or anything. It's all right here. It's built in. What if you take advantage of all of those things and it still doesn't get your son or daughter to proficiency? Well, we have summer intervention programs. This past summer, we instituted a Keystone Summer Intervention class, and we did it this year in both biology and in Algebra 1. And the results were phenomenal. Students came in for 10 classes, then they took the Keystone exam again at the end of that intervention. And we had high percentages of those students achieving proficiency. So it took just a little bit more to push them over the top. There may be some students who are further behind. They may need a remedial program. For some of our students, we have what is called an ALEX math program. And the ALEX math program is intended for students who are struggling with basic concepts and working at some of the lower levels of math. But it's designed to bring them up to speed so that they can achieve proficiency on the Keystone. So we've got ninth period, we've got the X period, we have the summer interventions, a lot of opportunities for students to get some extra help and some extra support. And we always have those 8 period per cycle math classes to bring them back to for the remediation. In middle school, if you've had an opportunity to look at the middle school program this year, you'll see some changes. Again, curricular adjustments. Your 7th grader can take Algebra 1, or they can take Math 7 at the honors level, or they can take Math 7 at the 5.0 level. But now, the 5.0 level is broken into 3 different categories. They're all meeting at 8 periods a cycle, so the students have the extra time. The ones in the, I'm sorry, I'm misleading you there. The Math 5.0, there is a 6 period per cycle, and then there are 2 that will meet 8 periods per cycle. So the Math 7 at the first one at the 5.0 level meets 6 periods per cycle. They're not quite ready for the honors level challenge, but they're in pretty good shape. They have their basic facts, they have their skills, and they have a good foundation on which to build. The Math Extended needs a little work in some of the basic pieces and some remediation and some additional support. The Strategic Math, and you're going to see it as a 2075 with an MS for Math Strategic on the code. That's for the students who are pretty far behind and need some basic restructuring and rework on rebuilding a foundation. So they're going to need a lot more to shore up those skills. But keep in mind, there's not a rush to get through Algebra 1. We have 7th graders taking Algebra 1. We have 8th graders taking Algebra 1. We have 9th graders taking Algebra 1. And we have 10th graders who are taking Algebra 1. So students can do it over time. The deal here is you need to be proficient before you can graduate. That's it. And if we've gotten most of the students proficient by the end of 9th grade or even by the end of 10th grade, we have the time in there to work on the remediation pieces here through the programs that I've talked about and through the opportunities that are available to students. I'll let you hear what's going on in biology and what options are available when a student is struggling in biology. And we're fortunate because Mr. Weathers teaches the students who didn't quite make the proficiency cut last year and ended up in the selected topics in biology course. So I don't want to take all the wind out of your sails there, Mr. Weathers. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hines. As we're looking at this again with biology, the first thing with the curricular alignment to the standards, there's the 38 different pieces of eligible content that makes up our curriculum as the biology teachers, which will be then tested during the Keystone. So we made sure as teachers that our curriculum goes in pace with those 38 different pieces of information that we are expected to cover by the time the students take the Keystone exam. There's 38 different eligible content that, again, is mandated by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. We also get to talk from 7th through 12th grade with some of those teachers as well, so that we can do a vertical alignment, so that we are building on a lot of the students' skills so that by the time they get to 10th grade, interpreting a graph or a table isn't as difficult for them, so that we can move on with some of the other more complex information or content that needs to be addressed. From there, the new materials and resources, we've been a big component of using the USA Test Prep. This is an online resource that gives students the opportunity to test themselves with level 2 and 3 questions. They can assess their own knowledge and see exactly where they fit. And it's really nice that it's broken up into the different modules or into the different 38 pieces of eligible content so that they can really see where they're weak and where they need a little bit more time or attention, and they can let us know. There's also where we can set it up and have it done as homework for the students so that they can do it at home, and it allows us to see when they report those scores to us where our students are having trouble understanding concepts and where we need to spend a little bit more time on different pieces of content. Also, as we get to have Keystone meetings and we sit down as a biology department, we get to share best practices with each other as into what is working in one classroom, what isn't working, and we also get to decide then as well, let's go ahead and embed some more of these constructed response questions into maybe our tests or into practice within the classroom so that when the students get to the Keystone, they've already seen these similar types of questions or structure of the questions so that they're not as nervous about the test. So we bring down that level of anxiety. We also are coming up with more level 2 questions. And last but not least, we're coming up with common labs that we feel are the most addressed while on the Keystone. And moving into the idea of the intervention, we do have the summer intervention program, which I did get a chance to teach over the summer as the students prepared right for that summer Keystone. And as Mr. Hines had said, we found great success with that. And really that led us into knowing that our selected topics in biology is going to do well this year, as that is brushing up on the information that the students may have had a little bit of trouble with as they were going through biology last year. And then it also allows us to sit with the students and really help them translate the test, have it make sense for them, or let them see exactly what the question was trying to ask, and basically try to give them as many skills and techniques then as possible to help them pass the Keystone. There are other things such as ADAPT, where we have student tutors, where what I'm saying might not make 100% sense to them, but their friend can say almost exactly the same thing, and suddenly they get it, almost like magic sometimes. So that's another thing that we have as well with our interventions. And I think last I was going to hand it off to Karen here to talk about the English literature
Okay,
portion.
thank you. One of the essential qualities that we need to build into the students' educations as we go through is the ability to think about thinking, and that's when we talk about Webb's depth of knowledge and teaching the students how to analyze a question and what is expected at each level. For the English curriculum, we see that beginning when the student begins reading and writing in elementary school. You'll see beginning next fall a new curriculum in place, grades 7 through 12, that's aligned to the PA core standards. Within that particular curriculum, you will see reading materials and writing and compositions that encompass all of these standards in preparation for the new curriculum. The curriculum is geared at a little higher level. You'll see a little text complexity when your students bring home a novel or they bring home an essay to read. It may be a little more difficult to read. There will be homework in grades 7 through 12 where the students have to do independent reading and be able to go back into the classroom and do some summary, to do some inference, to do some interpretation of what they've read at home. One of the things that we'll be instituting this summer is a reading program for grades 7 through 12. Previously, our students going into grades 9, 10, 11, and 12 have had information that they've had, novels that they've had to read over the summer. Beginning this summer, the students going into 7th grade into 8th grade, into 9th grade, into 10th, 11th, and 12th grade will have assigned summer reading. Each grade will be asked to read 2 books over the summer. You'll see the information on the North Penn website. There'll be 1 book or novel that they'll have to read, and then they'll have a choice as their second novel to read. So that's one of the things that we're doing immediately to kind of raise expectations. We talked about higher expectations, and this is just one of them. So you're going to see this a little bit of different curriculum coming home in the secondary English program. I'm going to skip to the 3rd bullet here because it kind of goes along with this. In doing this, what we're doing with the 7th grade reading program, and you're going to find out more about this during your course selection nights at the middle school, but the reading program in the 7th grade year is completely going to be revamped. And next fall, you will see a different reading program really targeting what the students' skills are requiring, what their needs are in different levels. And the basic reading program will be a little bit different than we have seen before. So the students in 7th grade will be taking an English course to talk about literary analysis. They'll be having a reading course at the same time to talk about reading skills and strategies to attack these more complex texts. So this is a little bit different that your incoming 7th graders will be experiencing for next fall. Now, reading interventions and help along the way. What we have beginning the RTII. As you're looking at your elementary schools, we have a program called Read 180 that's in both the middle schools and the high school for students who are struggling with their reading. And that whole reading program is really built to developing the skill to analyze and interpret a complex text. The students come into the 10th grade year where they're going to take the Keystone, and they're going to be working on the writing skills throughout middle school, and in 10th grade, they'll be upping that and working again with those writing skills. If, in fact, students in 10th grade aren't proficient on the exam, in 11th grade, the 11th grade curriculum, and it's at some levels, in this 4.0 level, has an extra 2 periods. It's the extra cycle time, and maybe it's 1 period that is 1 more period. So they have, in that 11th grade year, time to look at the skills needed to retake that Keystone exam. So we have built in along the way that really bottom foundation level in the elementary school for the reading program. In the middle school, we're building up reading and English programs for complex texts and analysis. And then in 10th grade, they would be taking the Keystone test. So we're building the students up so that, you know, our goal, of course, is to have all the students proficient the first time they take the Keystone exam, and that's kind of where we're headed, and that's our goal for the English. English is a little bit different because it builds from those reading skills that they had when they were little tykes in elementary school through the high school ability to analyze and critique and synthesize and evaluate something that they've read in a different type of text. Project-based assessments.
So as you can tell, we are really trying to work with students in the development of our program, in the development of our curriculum, and with our instruction. We want them to be successful on the Keystone exam. In the event that they are not proficient the first time that they take it, please know that we have, in addition to additional support for classroom instruction, please know that the state has actually put into place something called project-based assessments. Project-based assessments are developed by the state, so these are things that are done by the Department of Ed, that our students can participate in and take to show or demonstrate proficiency in the content areas that is not a multiple choice format assessment. So what we see from these, or what we will see from these project-based assessments, are ways that students can demonstrate that they have learned the eligible content and the things that they needed to know, do, and understand in Algebra 1, in biology, in English Lit, but in a different format. To give you some specific information about these project-based assessments, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Hines.
Thank you, Dr. Butts. Just as we don't make up the Keystone exams, we don't make up the project-based assessments. They are developed by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Just as we don't score the Keystone exams, we won't be scoring the PBAs either. You'll hear that PBA term used for project-based assessments, some of that lingo that we start to use as we talk more and more about this. So we're not going to be scoring it. What is the project-based assessment going to look like? As Dr. Butts said, we're going to try our best to get your students to be proficient first time around on the Keystones. If that doesn't work, we're going to provide interventions. We're going to work with them, and we're going to give them the Keystone again. If it doesn't work a second time, we'll provide additional interventions. But beginning with the class of 2017, when the students need to be proficient in all three areas in order to graduate, the project-based assessment will become an alternative pathway for students. If they've done the Keystone twice and it's not been successful, they can try this in their senior year. That's the thinking right now. It's an online assessment. We've already begun laying out what these courses are going to look like. Right now, we envision it as a 2-period per cycle minor for a semester. So the student can try the project-based assessment in the first semester of senior year, and if that doesn't work, they can go back and try the project-based assessment again. It's an online series of activities designed to demonstrate a student's knowledge of the specific course, whether it's Algebra 1, whether it's biology, whether it's English. There will be PBAs available for all three subject areas. Your student may be great in algebra, they may be great in English, biology could be the stumbling block. They get to the proficiency long before the end of junior year in 2 subject areas and still need it in a third. The PBA will be there as an option for them. It's an online, it'll have an ultimately there'll be a culminating project that will go along with that. And we'll even develop a unique grading system for that. And that's all in the plan as we move forward. It's an alternative pathway. It's not going to be the route for everyone. We're hoping that there won't be too many students who will find themselves in this situation. But it's another way for us to support students and ensure that they are, in fact, going to be able to graduate in 2017 and beyond. All of these things, all of these interventions are put in place because that's a requirement. You can't just take a Keystone, not do well on it, and then jump back and take another one without some necessary intervention in there. We have to be able to show that that intervention has, in fact, occurred. So, we've thrown a lot of information at you this evening. Some of you are sitting there just looking spellbound. Some are looking astounded. I'll open it up to any questions. So that everyone can benefit from the questions, I will repeat your question so that everyone can hear what the question was and then ultimately what the answer was. If there's a specific individual you'd like to direct the question to, you can let me know that. Otherwise, any one of the 4 of us will take a stab at it. Yes? I'll let you do this.
No, I don't want to. A general question, will you also be looking at the percentage of students that don't pass at what teachers they had as well? Or are they actually teaching what needs to be taught for the Keystone?
That's a very good question, and the state already thought about that question. And what the state has done is change the teacher evaluation system. And how students in a specific teacher's class do will relate directly back to that teacher and impact on their evaluation. So we're going to be looking at it, but it has a real impact on each teacher in those Keystone courses as well. Yes? The 2 ladies up here have 3 ninth graders between them, and They're not experiencing success right now. They're in the same class. Okay. Really failing. My first question would be, have you had a discussion with the teacher? And following that, have you had a discussion with the principal? The administrators need to be aware of that as well. They may be. That's one thing. Then you need to look at, if they're not experiencing success, what interventions are in place that are going to help that happen. We will, trust me, we'll be looking at the teaching staff, because we need to know who is getting the greatest success and whose students aren't experiencing success. This has a major impact on students for the class of 2017. And when you're talking ninth grade, your children are in the class of 2017. They're the first ones that are going to experience high school graduation, yay or nay, based on proficiency on these tests. So the district has a very vested interest in ensuring that we get every student to proficiency. So we're only at mid-year. There's certainly time to turn this around. I would urge you to get to the guidance counselor. I'd have a meeting with the teacher. And if you're not happy with those results, there's always a building principal in whichever buildings you're talking about. Is there anything anyone else would like to add to what I have said? Okay, other questions? Okay, let me come back here. Go ahead. Why do the Keystones end in 10th grade? A good question. We'd love them to be done sooner. The idea is, if this is going to be a graduation requirement, not expectation, but requirement, let's get as many students taken care of as soon as we possibly can and make sure they meet it. We could have said, and some districts have, that the English Keystone will be done in 11th grade. We've pushed it into 10th grade, again, to find out how many students do we have proficient, and then what remediation plans do we need to have in place for those who are not yet proficient. And we want to have some time to make those remediation plans workable, so that when 2017 comes along, or 2018, or whatever year we're talking about here, your son or your daughter is going to be able to graduate. So that's why we've made them as soon as possible. The other thing we thought about when we implemented all of this was, we don't want to give students all of these in one year. That's an incredible amount of pressure. What can we do to spread it out a little bit? Which is why the Algebra 1 is occurring for the 7th graders, the 8th graders. It's that end of course assessment that Dr. Butts had spoken about a little bit earlier in the evening. So we can get the Algebra 1 hopefully taken care of before 10th grade. It doesn't always happen, but for the most of the students it will. And then in 10th grade, biology is taught in 10th grade, so that's the earliest we can give that one. And when you look at the reading and the comprehension and all the skills that are necessary for English, 10th grade was about as early as we feel students have a fair shot at achieving success on the Keystone. Does that answer your question? Okay. Question right here. When are the exams happening? For your students who are taking them as end-of-course exams, they're scheduled, the state schedules them in May. In fact, in May, this year, it's the 2nd and 3rd week of May. Interesting for those who have students taking AP tests, they're the 1st and 2nd week of May. So May is a heavy testing time here in the high school, but in the middle schools, the same thing. Algebra 1, they have a narrow window of about 2 weeks when those Keystones have to be given. There are additional times when the Keystones are given. Unlike the PSSA, where you took it once a year and that was the end of it, and you couldn't do anything about it until the following year, with the Keystones, the states had a little more wisdom on that. And what they have done, there's an opportunity, after you've had some intervention, that summer intervention, I have students who can take the retakes in the end of July, early August. It's usually around the 31st of July, 1st of August in there is when there's a window. There's another window in December that we just finished some students testing on that, and there's another window in January when students can test as well. So there are opportunities along the way for the retesting option. The majority of students will take them in May. And then the district has said there's a lot of time and energy that's put into this. We're not going to give students final exams in those specific courses, just in the Keystone courses. So for the students in biology, that Keystone becomes a true end-of-course assessment. Students still have to come to school until the end of the year in June, but there is not a final exam then given in the biology course. There's not a final exam in your Algebra 1 course, and there is not a final exam in the English 10. Okay? So the pressure's on in May, and then it lightens up a little bit. There's still exams in the other courses, though, social studies and the other sciences, the other maths. Another question here, yes? They give us about roughly 2 hours for each one of the modules for each test. So when we get into May, we will schedule, at least in this building, from 7:30 till about 9:30 for students to take the first module. The next day, they'll come back and take the other module. But if a student says, I need more think time, I'm not done, I'm not ready, we have a room that students can work in, supervised. I've had students work on these until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they start at 7:30 in the morning. They have as much time as they need. If they leave, they cannot come back to that section of the test. The state's very firm about that. But we have students, we have some students who say, I need 2.5 hours, fine, take it. You need 3, take it. And the teachers, the rest of the teachers are very flexible with that. They know the student was taking additional time, and they don't hold them responsible for missing that class. They may need to know the material they missed on that time, but they're flexible with that. Yes, right here. Go ahead.
So this is the first year that they're taking the test?
The students in the high school and actually in the middle schools took it this past year. It was done back in 2012, 2013 was the first year.
So success, because I'm trying to figure out how these ladies over here were saying that, I'd like to know what happened last year in regards to that graduating class last year of, let's say, 1,100 kids. Out of that 1,100 kids, what percentage were proficient or better? What percentage failed?
Okay.
Question in regards to these ladies over here saying their current kids are struggling with it, but the tests don't come until they start in May. So how can they be struggling? The tests haven't even been presented to them, but May's not here yet.
I think what the ladies over here said was the struggling is happening now, but they're sitting in the course that is going to be tested in May, and they're concerned that their children are not going to be ready to be able to perform at the proficiency level. Did I get that correct? Okay. On the other part of it, go back and ask me that again.
So it's taken already, the tests have already been taken.
Oh, okay, I got it. Our seniors who graduated last year never took the Keystone. They are the last group that went through with the PSSAs. Our current seniors were the first students ever to take the Keystones. I'm going to do this off the top of my head, but when they did them, we had about 88% of the students were proficient in English. The math was about 85% proficient. The biology was 76% proficient. But here's another statistic for you. And the bio, I know I'm right on. When we looked at how our students did in relation to the rest of the county, North Penn High School students in biology were #1 in the county on that first run-through on the Keystones. And that's our current senior class. So we feel pretty good about not only our curriculum alignment, but our interventions and what we're teaching and what we're covering there. So we've got a really good track record. We weren't quite as good in English, and we were pretty close in math. I think we were about 4th in the county, and again, we were high up there. We weren't #1 in math. That bothered me. Go ahead, Dr. Holben.
Oh my goodness. Keep in mind as well that it's the current ninth graders who have the requirement for graduation. So, Mr. Hines cited the results we had from the first run through, which we were rather pleased with, not knowing exactly how it was going to turn out. But for the current group, nobody will be denied a diploma because they didn't pass a Keystone. That requirement kicks in with the current ninth graders. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that.
But I think your question was from the point of view, or perspective, how are kids doing now who've taken it, who don't have this graduation requirement hanging over their head? So to get a glimpse of our first run through and how we did. And as Dr. Holben said, we were pretty pleased with how we did. And when we looked at that biology, we were very pleased with that. A lot of other questions. Yes? In regards to elementary school, we saw how the English program was changed. How about the math? The elementary schools, and someone can help me on this a little bit, but they changed their curriculum this year to the Go Math program.
Yes, and please know that there is a plan in place for all the elementary grades K through 6, to have the Go Math program in place next year. So starting in September, we will have Go Math in grades K through 6. And the Go Math program, for those of you that are not familiar, is based upon the Pennsylvania Core Standards in Math, which will support all the work that we're doing not only with PSSAs, but also with students and preparing them to be Algebra 1 ready when they get to middle school.
Okay, other questions? Yes, over here. What about students who have IEPs, and how does that relate to everything? All students need to be proficient. There are provisions within the IEP that, in terms of what tests and what things can be taken. Students with IEPs may find themselves having to go the PBA route at some point. We're going to try to get through most of them, as many as we can, through the Keystone route, but PBA is an alternative assessment for those who have an IEP. And IEP students typically always graduate based on their IEP goals. IEP is an individualized education program. And that happens for students who are classified within the special ed department. And there's also a gifted IEP for students who are on the other end of that spectrum. Yes?
Working on the curriculum during the school
Question?
year this year.
Question.
The question was the gifted reading program, will it continue? They will be working. Yes. The answer is the gifted reading program going to be aligned to working with the regular reading program, and the answer is yes. All of those reading courses in the 7th grade level will be brought into alignment with the core standards and with the big ideas, with the curriculum framework for reading.
Other questions? Still quite a few hands. Let me start right here.
One is, if a student is in a 6th grade, but he goes to 7th grade math, Algebra 1, can he or she take a Keystone exam?
If a student is in 6th grade and then goes into 7th grade, can he take the Algebra 1 exam? Yes, at the end of 7th grade, because it's an end of course assessment. So that's where we do have 7th graders taking the Keystone.
And what is the process of applying for the grade?
You don't even have to apply. The question is, what is the process for applying? This is not like SATs or anything like that. Your students enrolled, they're in the course, it's going to happen to them at the end of the course, automatically. No application needed.
Second question,
Go ahead.
if a student is going to get proficient level, can he or she apply for or take the second test to go to advanced level?
Good question. His question is, if a student takes the test, tests at the proficient level, can they go back and retake the test to get to the advanced level? That is allowed with the SATs, but it's not allowed with the Keystones. Once you're proficient, you're proficient. And the other piece of information I'll share with you is that the proficiency level is also going to be on the transcript for the students, the high school transcript for the class of 2017 and beyond. That's the other expectation that goes along there. So students do need, those students in 7th grade taking the Algebra 1, if they get a proficient, that's what will go on the transcript and they won't retake the test. Does that, okay? I saw some other questions back here. Yes? The question is, if they're in elementary school, will they still take PSSA? No? Then I misunderstood. There are PSSAs in middle school, and those will continue in grade 7 and grade 8. For those who are in the Keystone, and Tony, I'll bank on you to give me the answer on that.
Yes, for those students that are in grade 7, actually grades 3 through 8, they must take the PSSA exam in reading and math and science, depending on what year they're in. If they are in, for example, let's say in 7th grade, they are expected to take both the PSSA or whatever PSSA exams are in 7th grade, which are reading and math currently. And they will also be expected to take the end of course Keystone exam if they are enrolled in an Algebra 1 class. So we do see the potential for some of our students to have multiple standardized, state standardized assessments taking place in the spring, and that is a requirement of the law. The grade test is a benchmark assessment that we do give to students. That's used to help us understand what their strengths and their needs are. In this case, grade is for reading. So that supports us in helping them become better at reading by showing us where their strengths, where their weaknesses are. So that will be maintained. Now that is something that we give, again, to support our students.
Yes, right here. I like your thinking. When do the results come back? We said your sons and daughters will take the Keystones in May. When do we get the results? And the other part of the lady's question is, are the students supposed to be available in the summer for some of the intervention? The results this past year came back immediately after the 4th of July. I think it was around the 7th or 8th of July. We came back from the 4th of July weekend and the results were here. Our intervention was slated from about the 20th of July till the 1st of August. So we had a narrow window in which folks notified parents, your son or daughter has performed in the basic range and could benefit from this intervention. So we get on the phone and we call people on the phone and say, the results are in, you won't have them in hand yet, we've received them, but because there is another opportunity to retake the Keystone test in early August or late July, whatever it is, we want students to have that opportunity. Do they have to sit home all summer and wait for the results? No. If not, there is a plan for what courses they will take, and you'll hear that at Course Information Night, which is Thursday night of this week, on what the sequences are there for students. But if they want to avoid getting into some of those remediation plans, and they want to take care of it in the summer, the option exists. But it's tight. It's a tight turnaround for us and for the students. All the way in the back, I see your hand up. Right here. I don't know that off the top of my head. I do see Dr. McCall or Dr. Galloway sitting over there, and maybe she can help me on this. The question is, the high school has an opportunity for students during lunchtime to get help, get extra help. What do the middle schools have? And I'm looking at you thinking MOLP is an opportunity in your building. I think lunch study at Penn Brook, and there's E3 at Penndale. But anything you want to add to that, Dr. Galloway?
At Penfield, we also have something that we've created called EMMA, which is the Early Morning Math Academy, and then we have the LLAMA, which is the Late Afternoon Math Academy. And this is a time when there's 43 minutes when kids can go back to their math teachers and get some extra help. So we have those things too.
It's before and after school. Now, we're speaking for Penfield. Unfortunately, I know Mr. Galante just left. I saw him leave 2 minutes ago. He got out before your question. Any questions back here? While I'm back here. Yes.
My sixth grader going into seventh. With this summer remediation that you're going to be offering, is that something that you would suggest they take just to get them acclimated with everything that's going to be happening? Not because they need it, but to just make them feel comfortable going into seventh grade and with everything that they're going to be learning?
The question is, her child is going from 6th to 7th grade, and is there some sort of program in the summer that will work? The summer remediation is intended for students who have taken the Keystone and are attempting the Keystone another time. They want to do it again. Nothing specifically aimed at that I'm aware of at the high school level. Dr. Butts, is there anything that you might be aware of that's happening?
That's actually a great suggestion. So that's something that I'll definitely take back to our math supervisor. But currently we don't have a math program geared towards sixth graders going into seventh grade for like a algebra readiness course. But that's a great suggestion, so thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Go ahead. Question is, if a student passes the biology course but not the Keystone, what happens next year? As a junior, the student then needs to be ready to take a retest, and in order to do so, they are required to take the selected topics in biology semester course. They have to go that route. There's enough latitude within the day that if they're really sold on wanting to do chemistry as well, they could opt for that as well. Or they can defer the chemistry to senior year if that's the course they're looking for. But we're going to get them into remediation. Our plan is to get the students into remediation as quickly as possible, to get them to proficiency as quickly as possible, so that if they don't get there, we have the time to get them to that point. Does that, okay? And you had a question as well? It was okay. Any others in the back here? Yes. How will it be helpful for college admissions in the future based on the Keystone? I don't have an answer to that because I don't know what the admissions officers in the colleges are thinking. I think once it's on the transcript, it's going to be a piece of information, but it's just going to be one piece of information. If you're proficient on the Keystones, but you've been taking honors level courses and AP courses and doing well in those courses, I think that's the performance in the actual classes will probably, and I'm saying probably, I'm not a college admissions officer, but probably weigh more heavily in their decision. But if you have a student who's not proficient, that's going to create some questions in your mind as a college admissions officer too. So I don't know exactly the answer to your question, but that's the best I can do at this point. Okay? Questions up front? Yes. No, the level of proficiency will be on the transcript. It's going to say advanced. It's going to say proficient. It's going to be advanced, proficient, basic, or below basic. That might affect college admissions. But what we will do is put the highest level of performance. So if a student in 9th grade got a basic or below basic, but then they went back and they took it again, we're going to put their best one on the transcript. Once they hit the proficiency level, going back to the question that was asked earlier, can they keep going and retake it? No. They've got to get to the proficiency level. But if they get a basic a second time and they decide they want, rather than going the PBA route, they want to try the Keystone a third time, they get the proficient, that's what we'll put on the transcript. We'll put their best score. The state requires we're going to have to put it on the transcripts. Yes? The state sets the standards. Last year, it was 1,500, and the way they score this, if you scored a 1,500, you hit the proficiency mark. If you were at a 1,497, you got labeled basic. And my heart went out to, we had some students who had a 1,497, and it's like, God, they're so close. They're the type of students we call in the summer and say, you need to come in and get into the summer intervention program, because with a little more work, we can get you right over that mark. The state sets the standard. Is it always going to be 1,500? I don't know that for sure. Tony, do you have any insight into that?
Unless the state would make changes to the test and have to rescale it, the cut scores will stay where they are. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
So if I'm in pre-algebra in 9th grade, and we said Juan and I will be in pre-algebra for final paper in the year, but I don't pass my Keystones. I graduate and I leave 9th grade, and I go to 10th, so I have to just work to get past my Keystones. Where if I don't pass it by 12th grade, where I won't graduate high school. Does that make sense?
Your understanding is absolutely correct. Now, if you pass the course in 9th grade, the pre-algebra course in 9th grade, is pre-algebra even in 9th grade, Barb? I think pre-algebra is 8th grade, and all of 9th grade is just algebra, right? Algebra 1. Let's assume it's Algebra 1 in 9th grade. Pass the course, but Keystone comes back and you're not quite proficient yet. What we can do is we will put students into, for next year, we'll put them into the geometry extended here at the high school. As long as they pass the course and they have a good solid grade, A, B, or C. If they're D, they're kind of weak. But if they've got an A, B, or C, but they're not proficient on the Keystone, we'll put them into the geometry course. The geometry teachers are planning to spend intervention time in the fall semester next year, so that a student in that situation would then be able to take a retest next December in their 10th grade year. They're still in geometry, they're moving ahead, they're getting the geometry curriculum, but in the 8 period per cycle, they're going to do that intervention piece to get them ready for the Keystone in December. Go ahead. And we've already begun thinking that way, which is why when you look at the program of studies for this year, at the level 5, You're going to see a 6-period per cycle math class. You're going to see an 8-period extended math class. And then you're going to see this, the strategic math group. All of those are designed as interventions, particularly in those 8-period per cycle classes, to get the students up to speed on that. I won't say it's apples to oranges, but there's not a direct one-to-one either. I'll give you permission to breathe a lot easier on that. If you see proficient, 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 if your child has been doing that along the way on the PSSAs, not a guarantee, but you can breathe a lot easier, believing that that's going to have a carryover. Yes, sir.
How confident are we in like the formative assessments? Like, let's say they go ahead and pick another benchmark, and a month before the Keystones, they realize, all right, there's a large cluster of students that are not ready for the Keystone. Do they have the potential to opt out and then, you know, kind of wait for the next semester, or once you're in algebra, that's it, you have to take the, you know, you have to take the Keystone?
Let me start right there. Once you're in algebra, you have to take the Keystone at the end of the course, because it goes back to that idea of the end of course assessments. So there's no escaping it there. You may get into a remediation if it doesn't work for you, and the next course you'd be able to opt, like the example I just gave here, in the middle of the geometry course, the student would be eligible, because there has been intervention, they would be able to go back and retake the Keystone. Yes, go ahead, Diane.
You mentioned the benchmark assessments. Part of the reason we're giving the benchmark assessments is so that we're not finding out a month before that the students are having difficulty, that during the year, as the students are taking the benchmark assessments, we can see if there are skills and strategy they need reinforcement or reteaching on, so that with the idea being that right before the assessment, most students are well prepared to be proficient. So we are trying to use those assessment results to be proactive. And as Mr. Hines mentioned, we really have been trying to go at this from the mindset of we want as many students as possible to pass the first time around. So to the woman's point back, we're not just playing cleanup after the fact. We're trying to have those remediation opportunities and have those extended reteaching opportunities before students ever get to the Keystone to maximize their possibility of being proficient.
Yes, go ahead. Actually, the question is, are there additional Keystones? In math, there's one Keystone, and it's for Algebra 1. Not for Algebra 2, not for geometry, not for pre-calc or calc. One Keystone. The state is basically saying that everyone who graduates from high school needs to have a certain level of math. And that's what proficiency means. You've gotten to that level of math, and that's why they've made it a graduation requirement. It's nice for students to go on to Algebra 2. If you want to go to college and you're going to need Algebra 2, you're going to need the geometry, the state is saying we expect all students to perform up to this level as a minimum. That's what the whole idea behind these Keystones is. Yes, sir. The question is, when are these exams taking place? I have students who take Algebra 1 in 7th grade. At the end of their course, they take the exam, and if they're proficient or above, they're finished with the Algebra 1. Another group of students might be in 7th grade math honors. They might be in 5.0. The following year, they take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. At the end of that course, they take the Keystone, not anyone else, just that group. When they're proficient, are you following me? And there's still a few who get to 9th grade and they're taking Algebra 1, and they're just the ones who take it. Yes, yes. And the bio, nobody has the bio before 10th grade. So we're giving the bio at the end of 10th grade as soon as they finish the course, and I've explained the English 10. The other ones that you mentioned, the civics and the English comp, they're on the drawing boards. They're looking at those for the class of 2019, but they're still on the drawing boards, and that's not totally set in concrete yet. That's just a sneak preview of what to expect for those of you who have younger children. Yes? The question is, current high school students have a graduation requirement of completing and passing a graduation project. That project will go away when the class of 2016 graduates. The class of 2017 will not have to do the graduation project. You'll begin, when you start to look at the program of studies for this year, you'll begin to see, and we've got it very clearly in there, class of 2017 and beyond will no longer have to do that graduation project. They have enough hanging over their heads with the Keystones. They don't need one more thing on their plate. So class of 2014, 2015, 2016, yes, they have to do the graduation project, and that's a state requirement. Yes? Is there a number of attempts? Is there a maximum on the Keystone? Not really. We like to think of it as probably 2. It could be 3. It could be more. Some student may be in the project-based assessment and say, well, I've tried this, and this isn't for me, and I'm not feeling good about this. I'll go back and take the Keystone again and try it again. They can do that, as long as there are interventions in place and there's been some work on their part that has occurred. So there's not a maximum. But there becomes a frustration level with students. You take a test the first time and you don't make it. Okay, think of your driver's test. You take it the first time, you don't make it. All right, we'll go try it again. If you haven't passed your driver's test after 5 times, it gets tough to go back and have to take that driver's test again. So, And for them, that's where the PDA, or the project-based assessment, the PBA, is in place for them. Yes, ma'am. No, don't be sorry. You're here to ask questions tonight.
So when I go in next year, I have Algebra 1, I know that I have to take my Keystone. You said it's typically a 2-hour test. If I want, I can exhaust the day 8 hours. Do I get excuses from all my other tests because when a student's going to take it for 8 hours and nobody's setting all these expectations for me in another setting period? Does that make sense? That I can focus on Keystone, you guys know that we're all taking it today, and everybody else can wait on home and break.
As the building principal, I build the schedule and I allow plenty of time for students. And I expect and hope that most of them will finish within that time frame. But I know there are a few who are going to need. And I had a young man last year, that was still PSSA. He took until 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day to work on it. And you know what? When his results came back, he was advanced in English, he was advanced in math. He sat there and worked on it all day. Ultimately, you're going to have to be responsible for what occurs in the other classes. But as the building principal, I ask the teachers, do not give other assessments. There's pressure for students to take this test. Realize that it's not a time for quizzes. It's not a time for the term paper to be turned in. It's not a time for the critical paper, and it's not a time for tests. So we try to take that off the plate. They are, in fact, missing what's going on in terms of the conversation, the discussion in other classes. But we try to, I even tell the teachers, I want kids to get a good night's sleep I want them to have a good breakfast before they're doing this, because all of those are little things that might be able to push that student who might get a 1497 up to 1500. Just making them a little bit sharper, giving them that extra rest. So I try to take the pressures off. I'll have a few teachers who try to sneak in little things there, here and there. But I don't want them even giving homework in that time frame. If the students have been working hard and they're coming in and giving their best on their test, they're exhausted. I'm not sure exactly how the middle school has the schedule set up, but I know the high school sets it up. I test the students in the morning. I try to get them when they're fresh, they're wide awake, and we'll do the first 2 hours. And then the rest of the day, we'll do a modified bell schedule, shortened periods or something to get the rest in. Again, please, no homework, no tests, no quizzes, realizing the importance. And the other thing it goes back to, our teachers are understanding the importance, because it goes back to what a lady over on this side had asked me earlier in the evening about how this is related to the teacher's own evaluation. And that has an impact on every teacher in the building, the way the state has set things up. Yes, all the way back here. I'll come back to you because I can't hear you that far away. The question is, now that they have Keystones, will they ever phase out the PSSAs? Well, they did for the high school, but I don't think so. As Dr. Butts mentioned, PSSAs are going to be required in grades 3 through 8. That's an expectation. The PSSAs, though, the good part about the PSSAs, it gives students a sense of how they're doing. It gives them a little bit of practice. It's kind of like taking the PSAT before the SAT. At least that's my perspective on it. So it's good practice, and it gives you as a parent a sense of how are they doing. The lady over here who had mentioned my child has had proficiency or advanced back on the PSSAs. Can I expect that on Keystones? I'd like to be able to expect that, but it's not going to be a perfect one-to-one lineup. But it gives you a good idea of how your student might do. If their performance on the PSSAs is weak, as a parent, you have to say to yourself, they need some remediation, and what is the school providing in terms of remediation? Does that answer your question? Okay. Any others? Yes? If they have to retake the Keystone, is it exactly the same test? We could all be taking the Keystone right now. You'd have one version, you'd have another version, you'd have another version. They have multiple versions for each administration of the test. So the likelihood they're ever going to see the same one again is probably about nil.
Different questions.
Yes?
How many times do you take the Keystone before you feel that you should switch over to the PBA, or even how many do you do the PBA or Keystone?
How many times should you take the Keystone before you decide to switch over and take the PBA? After twice, you can make the decision and switch. If you get into senior year and you haven't made it on the Keystones, you need to get into the PBA in senior year for sure, because that's your other avenue. Up until that point, you can continue trying the, retaking the Keystones. You could take it in the end of 10th grade. If I'm thinking about biology, the end of 10th grade, you could take it again in the summer after the summer intervention. Then you come back and you take the selected topics in biology course, take it in January of the following year. So there's 3 times. If you're still not happy, you could try the selected topics in biology again. That would give you a 4th time. But by now, we're starting to look ahead at senior year, and then it's time to think of PBA. Does that answer your question? Give you some idea of that sequence. Yes? You're great. You keep coming up with more questions.
What are the avenues available for students to prepare for Keystone apart from school? In school, probably they are doing brain plays or whatever test they are doing. But when the student wants to make sure that, okay, we translated. What kind of avenue is available for the students to prepare themselves for doing something at home and whatever?
What avenues are there in order to prepare yourself beyond school for the Keystone? You're sitting here probably thinking there's an SAT prep program. There are other college board prep type programs out there. I'm not aware of any Keystone prep programs yet. This is young, this is new. Somebody is going to say, here's a business opportunity, and we're going to create an opportunity here to coach and to work with students. I mean, that's what folks did with the College Board. Look at your SAT prep courses and the number of different organizations and businesses out there that offer ways to prepare for the SAT prep. So you're going to see that same thing when individuals, groups get a better handle on exactly what it is that they need to know for the Keystones. It comes down to the essential content. It comes down to the state standards. They'll get it all figured out, just as the textbook manufacturers have to go back and revise their systems so that they can be asking questions at that depth of knowledge level 2 and the depth of knowledge level 3. Enterprising individuals are going to come up with that, but I'm not aware of any at this point.
I just wanted to jump in there, as the USA Test Prep can be used at home, and I know we have biology at the moment. I believe we also have math, and English has also been purchased. I think it was this year, or maybe it was last year. It's a web-based application, so as long as you have internet or a place that you can access the internet, then you're more than welcome to use their programs in order to test your proficiency levels. And they also have videos on there as well, that if you don't understand something, they have professional educators that can walk through each part of the content so that you can understand it. And it's great so that the students can play it and go backwards and forwards and until they really completely understand that concept. That's USA Test Prep, and we actually give the students logins once they get to the high school. I don't believe we have given them logins if they're in the middle schools yet, and I don't think we will.
Do we in Algebra 1? We do.
Okay, I apologize. We do in Algebra 1.
So if you're in Algebra 1, 10th grade biology, or 10th grade English, they have a log on for that application.
With the USA Test Prep, as you're speaking there, that you're saying that the teacher can only assign certain things. That is one option. The teacher can assign different benchmarks, or they can create customized tests, but the students are also able to log in and they can click different options of, I want to focus on the eligible content that relates to the characteristics of life for biology. And they can click on that and they can open up a bank of questions, and then they can go through that bank of questions to see how well they understand that information. They could also do one for biochemistry or ecology or evolution. So they can work through, and they can also decide if they want to take 25% of what would be a Keystone, 50%, or the full portion of multiple choice questions for the Keystone as well, which could be 32 to 35 multiple choice questions. So there is an opportunity, if their teacher isn't assigning things, that they can go ahead and do it themselves as well. You're welcome.
Yes.
As I understand that remediation and intervention comes after the student fails or not becoming proficient. Is there any mechanism before the student takes the exam?
The question is, there are remediation programs that occur after the student has taken the exam. What about before? What can you do to prepare your student? What measures do we have? It goes back to what we've been talking about here in terms of these benchmark tests that are given along the way. That's one indicator. The other indicator, I think, is when you see what level and within that level, whether it's 7th or 8th grade, whether your student's taking the honors level or the 5.0 or the 5.0 extended or the 5.0, the math strategic course, there are some indicators where how much work needs to be done. And again, the interventions are built into those courses. Any other questions? Yes? You want to be the last one? I'll bet you're not.
During this course of like from 7th grade to seniors, they'll be taking like at different levels in different these they are enrolled in the program. Algebra and biology related. Let's say like 7th grade like algebra in 7th grade was not that good. And he enrolls into the intervention program in 8th grade. So in his like 7th grade report, is it like mentioned that like this kid like did not like pass through that like this time? Is there any indicator on 7th grade like report, end of the year report that this guy, this kid like took the test but like did not get there? And that will be that will be efficient in the next year when the next.
Is there any indication or report on that? Not on the report card. Remember that I said the results don't come back until July, and you're going to have that report card in your hand by the end of June or the 1st of July, depending on when the school year ends. So it won't appear, nothing will appear on the report card. You will get the results. We send you the results. We find a way of getting the results to you after we have them, and that's usually. We get them in July, but till we get official results on a printout report. The individual nice paper that comes with the bar charts and the grids and the information from the state, that doesn't come until late August sometimes. But we make sure those get in the hands of parents. It'll be on the transcript. That's the only place it's going to appear. Right. Yes.
What'll appear on the transcript is the student's best score, not their first score. So if they've taken it multiple times, their best score is the one that'll be there. Yeah. Right.
Any other questions? I told you it wouldn't be last. Go ahead.
If they score proficient on the PBA, that's what'll show on the transcript. What'll be on the transcript is the subject and the final proficiency level that the student reaches. Correct. Correct. The idea being the PBA is assessing the same skills that the Keystone is. It's just doing it through a more open-ended format than a multiple choice format. No, the transcript would not say whether it was exam or PBA. It would just give the final level of proficiency.
Hey, we appreciate the fact that you came out to learn more about it. It's important for you as parents to be informed about this and to go into this with your eyes opening and have some understanding of what is being asked of your sons and daughters. So that's why we put the program on tonight. We wanted to get that information out to you and make it available to you. So thank you for coming. And thank you for coming with loads of questions, too.